Yo, and we're live on Beat People Podcast 79. I'm your host, B-Boy Tech, with your host, Ken Flux Pierce. And we got a couple special guests here today. We're talking to Aaron Higgins of 1010 Music, Bitbox, Black Box, Blue Box, and just a myriad of dope boxes, Euro rack effects, and tool sets. So, I'm excited to get into this and talk about the Blue Box and all these other things. And I'm happy to have Fest Grandiose up in here. And y'all may know him from Reverb or from live performances around the internet and such. So, let's get into it right after this. Hey. How's everybody?
Good. How are you?
Good. Good to have you, Aaron. It's been a while.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let's go around the table. Ken, you good?
I was just telling you about how I burnt some of my hair off outside just a little bit ago.
Still got plenty left.
Other than that, I'm doing okay. I mean,
you got more left, but I suggest if you're gonna do it again, at least make a field recording of it.
I'm just glad that honestly, I'm just glad that I don't smell it, because usually when you burn your hair up, that's all you smell for like a week. But no, I got a little bit lucky, so it was outside, and but. Yeah, man, I've been doing okay and very, very busy times. I'm happy to see Aaron and Fess on here, man.
Yeah. Fess, you good? Fess. Uh-oh. We may have to get Fess to reconnect. Well, hey, listen. let's keep it moving. Let's keep it moving. And so I'm gonna say what's up to everybody out in the chat. We got HR Terra, Studio Don. We got Christine Higgins. Fest dropped off. He'll be back in. Travarsi out there. Yeah. So, Aaron, while we kind of wait for Fest to reconnect, I'm interested let's talk about 1010 Music and kind of a bit of the origin. How'd you all get started and come into doing this thing that's 1010 Music?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but let me try and.
It's all good.
Let's see. So I was working at Native Instruments in 2015 and like eager to try something new and different. So I left to start a new venture. I initially played around with Minecraft. My kid's really into it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
If you've played it, it's a virtual world based on cubes. And my first inspiration was to build the synthesizer in Minecraft, which was a lot of fun, but incredibly not useful. I mean, it was something that I enjoyed making, but people were not really interested. So I then came to realize that hardware was taking off at that point, and so I took a lot of the work that I built in terms of custom synthesizer and sampling and previous work I'd done on time stretching and beats and whatnot, and decided that the world needed a touchscreen sampler in Eurorack. It seemed like that was Eurorack continues to grow, but at that time, 2015, it seemed like a perfect opportunity to do something digital, to build something that sort of complemented all the analog stuff in the world, or things that were, still had knobs. Nothing really had very few things had a screen. Almost nothing had a touch screen. So, building a sampler based on stuff I'd learned doing iOS apps and other things, that's was the inspiration, was to steal all the best ideas from plugins and from apps and put them into modules and see how far we could take that. And eventually that became something that morphed from the Eurorack world into tabletop products, which is some of the stuff you've got in front of you today. And that's also been an interesting, world to explore, because there's a move towards dedicated hardware and tabletop gear, but still, in effect, we're building computers with lots of software in them. So it's still a delicate balance of trying to build a product as opposed to just writing a bunch of software.
I think you've done a good job, and I think the idea of a touchscreen anything in Eurorack was pretty brilliant and ballsy, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I still think if a product design person brought to my attention like a few years ago, like, hey, let's put a screen and the connections on the same panel, like that just seems stupid. But that's that's how Eurorack works. You've got one surface for both. But
yeah,
thank you.
And I mean it's brilliant, and I mean, I see Bitbox stuff in a lot of racks, quite frankly. And I do think that it's helped. In general, samplers in Eurorack has kind of revolutionized live performance with Eurorack. You know what I mean? And I think Bitbox is having a lot to do with that.
It just seemed like something that back when we started was underrepresented, and sampling's an important part, as of course you guys know.
Mhm.
You can do so much with it. I mean, we've then taken that into things like granular synthesis and added onboard effects and that kind of stuff. But there's just so much you can do with bits, and having a screen to be able to manipulate stuff in real time or with a MIDI controller. Like there's just the thing I love most about Eurorack is that it's an opportunity to build your own instrument. And Eurorack is very much of a cottage industry with lots of different companies doing pretty much whatever they want. And
Mhm.
it gives you guys, the musicians of the world, the chance to build something completely unique,
Yeah.
and we're happy to be a part of
All
that.
right. Yeah, it's awesome. Just the entire environment, and you just extending that with the tabletop device. I flipped when I first saw Black Box. I jumped on it like immediately and was lucky enough to get one of your like first runs. And I mean, what can I say? You keep updating the thing. The thing is amazing. Like I carry it around. I actually keep it tucked away because I got a 1 year old running around right now, and she can pick it up and toss it. But yeah, it's awesome, and I enjoy the community that you've built with it, and you're pretty active with the Facebook group as well. So it's like as soon as we start getting loud about a new feature or whatever, usually you implement that. So it's very awesome.
Yeah, I mean, having the opportunity to change the software is both a blessing and a curse. But yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of things in response to the users, and we're back. We've finished up the blue box, and now we're back working on some black box stuff. But there's no shortage of ideas, and in fact, it's like almost overwhelming. Of like it's constant, wish list, you know, overload.
What
There's just it never gets shorter.
what prompted you to jump to the blue box? Just like was it because my first impression of it was that a lot of people were getting in the black box to just try to either record full songs or play full songs. And was that the response with the blue box, or did you already have that in mind?
That's something we had in mind for quite some time. I mean, I was always inspired by the live jam scenario, or the sort of impromptu jam, like bring three people together, let them run wild, maybe clock some stuff together, and at the end of it, if I recorded it several times, and it became clear to me and others who brought this to my attention that you've got a mix down, and if you want, you've got like 45 minutes of mix with like a really cool 7-minute song spread out over 45 minutes, and the only chance you have to like get that down to something useful and worth listening to again is to break out the stems and cut things and rearrange things. And so it was inspired by that. Like you need that multi-track mix, and I'd used a computer a few times to do that, and that's okay. But now you're like dragging an interface and a computer, and you often don't have enough table space for it. So that was really the genesis, was to build something that could both do the mixing and do the multi-track recording. I mean, the key difference between Black Box and Blue Box is Blue Box has 6 stereo inputs, Black Box has 1. So there's a fundamental hardware difference. Digital mixing, it was, for the longest time, it seemed kind of, why would you do that? Like there's enough mixers in the world. We were inspired by the fact that so few line mixers exist. So few mixers are focused on synthesizers. Practically every mixer you pick up has half mic pre's and mono channels, and if you're lucky, the other half will be stereo channels. But the Blue Box is meant to be that sort of synth player's mixer that can record and capture. And if you have a mic or something, use some offboard thing and bring it into the Blue Box. But we wanted to build the line input only focused thing that just is very rare out there.
I'm sure your file organization is exactly, or not exactly, but almost just the same and just as easy as the black box file organization, which is another thing that I enjoy about it. I can like straight drag and drop wave files, from whatever folders I have on my computer onto the black box, and it's right there. Time stretches it in the box. Is that the same with the blue box as well?
Yeah, it's using a very similar structure with separate directories for projects. You're recording directly into WAV files. There's nothing sort of there. It's as soon as you record it, it becomes a WAV file, and you could even stop in the middle. You would still have the partial WAV file. very much the same project structure. I mean, we were inspired by things like the Raspberry Pi, where you just drop a
Yeah.
new card in and it becomes something completely different, or
Mhm.
things like digital cameras, which are just, you know, very straightforward. You take your pictures and you pull the card out and stick it in your computer, and there they are.
That's awesome, man.
Hopefully, with a little better naming and a little more, intelligence, so it's not just, IMG 3246
Yeah.
and 47 and so on. But at least it'll number your
Underscore two
tracks and
underscore
use
three underscore three four.
right.
Yeah.
It will use, longer file names. It will include the names of your tracks. It will include the number of the take. So at least you'll have something to start with.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Very nice. Well, I could tell you, for instance, when I sit and you think about the power in this sort of combo
Yes.
right here, it's kind of crazy.
Uncanny.
It's uncanny. Yeah, this is
Yep.
a lot of power in just this small little. This is as big as I mean, my iPad Pro is around here somewhere, and this is not even as wide as that in portrait. Um, super compact, super portable, and everything. And I think the size is almost you don't realize how much power you get when you actually look at the thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, actually, I really enjoy that view there when you've got a like black box or a blue box sitting in the sort of dead space of an older keyboard, because it's able to sit places that otherwise would be unused. Yeah, I mean, one of the big points of that is that we've gone with 3.5 millimeter jacks, which certainly isn't for everybody, but there's enough cables in the world that
Mhm.
are like
Yeah.
dual 1/4 inch mono to stereo 3.5 millimeters, that you can get away with that, and it sounds just fine, and makes it a much smaller piece.
Yeah, I totally agree.
One of the things that I'm finding that's really nice on this thing is just like the build quality is very solid, both on Black Box and on this. The knobs are a little bit different on this one, but it's just like a really chunky, solid piece of kit. And Fess mentioned about how he keeps it out of reach of his 1-year-old because they could throw it around. Luckily, I mean, aside from like if something directly hit the center of the screen or
Yeah.
something, I really don't think you can damage this thing. It's it's the kind of thing you could chuck into a backpack and be good to go. You know?
I mean, don't pour any
Yep.
liquids on it. We have seen we have seen that return.
The
Other than
beer
that, it's pretty
return.
solid.
Well, I've got a few sweat droppings on it from performing with it with the black box rather, and it survived, so it is pretty durable.
So let's get a little bit of lineage on the product line. So what was the first, and then where we ended up now is with the blue box. What was the
Sure.
first product?
Do you want me to go through the modular stuff as well, or start with
Yeah, the modular stuff as well.
Okay. So we've built several different modulars now. We started with Bitbox, which is a 24-bit sampler based off a micro SD card. That's everything is stored on the card. Nothing's actually in the device, so you can easily move that around and go back and forth to your computer. So we bundle that with a couple of gigabytes of samples, or you can create your own. As a sampler, it can record in stereo. It's using Eurorack levels. It's DC coupled, so you can record like all kinds of different stuff. We've heard of people recording mix outputs using that thing. So that was our first product. We introduced that in 2016. It was followed by 2 different flavors of the same hardware with different firmware on it. We've got something called Synthbox, which is a polyphonic wavetable synthesizer. After that, we did Effectsbox, which is a multi-effects, 2-in, 4-out unit that can do sequence-based effects, kind of like Effectrix from Sugar Bytes.
Mhm.
That was the third one. The fourth was Toolbox, which is a utility module, very similar looking, but different hardware behind the scenes. It is a 16-element sequencer slash, LFO utility CV sequencer. Basically a Swiss Army knife in a 26 HP unit. After that, we did some crazy diversions. We tried something that was built on the Teensy. We built a Euro Shield product that was something that would host Teensy. Are you familiar with that?
Mhm.
I guess for the sake of the audience, it's a Arduino-based thing that's the size of a stick of gum that it uses open source. It's a really great place to get started. That was actually one of the first pieces of hardware I used when I was doing development work, embedded work. So I highly recommend that. We built the Euro Shield. What am I missing? We did a diversion and did something with lasers called the Laser Box. And I believe that's the extent of my modules. Am I forgetting anything? I think. Oh, and then we follow that up more recently with Bitbox Micro and Bitbox Mark II. So there's two new products as of May of this year, inspired by people want things that are small. I mean, inspired by the fact that the black box did very well. People like to save real estate both on their tabletop and in the Euro rack. So we built a smaller version of Bitbox called Bitbox Micro. So it's got a 2-inch touchscreen. It was inspired by a lot of our customers who seem to only have about half of the Big Brother hooked up at any given time. So that's been quite popular. I also forgot to mention a collaboration we did with Media Overkill called the Wave Razor module. They
Right.
Media Overkill have a really cool desktop synthesizer that's kind of like the combination of slicing and sampling. We've got it's kind of like recycle, but at the sub cycle level. It's like you're cutting up little bits and pieces of waveform to create a new tone, and you're doing that and manipulating that on the fly. So what they did in concert with our hardware was build a really cool like dark module that you can see on our website that Richard Devine and other people use to create just otherworldly tones. So that's something that's been well received. I believe that's the extent of the modules. About 2 years ago, we were inspired by how things are breaking apart, how things are breaking out on the desktop. I've got a circuit here from Novation. I've always been a big fan of the K oscillator. There's all kinds of like cool like single purpose tabletop products. Of course, it's got a different set of rules. Designing for that market has a few different things. For one thing, you don't have to put the jacks and the screen on the same plane. That's a nice thing. There's a little more expectation that it's going to be self-contained and do something by itself. It shouldn't have to rely on other things. But like the evolution we've seen in Eurorack, it's nice that tabletop is kind of evolving to be a build your own instrument, albeit on kind of a bigger scale, where you're more likely to be combining like an electron piece or a Korg piece or something else and creating this is the drummer, that's the keyboard player, that's the synth nerd, and this is the drummer. It's so like those things, you're buying separate boxes, and Black Box was our first entry into that marketplace. So we built a like groove box, again using 24-bit sampling and playback, something using a touchscreen, using a lot of the same things we learned along the way with Bitbox, that touchscreens are quite useful, but having some physical buttons is really important, especially when you're talking about a play button. That was one thing that we really missed on a piece like the Toolbox, that it's very hard to hit play when it's something on the screen. Let's see. I'll try to wrap this up. But so then Black Box was successful. We did already talk to some extent about how Blue Box evolved from that or alongside that. We were inspired by the fact that it did well, that people like things that are small, that people were happy to have 3.5 millimeter interconnects, that they don't really need mono phone jacks from 120 years ago. Like we can do something a little better than that, a little smaller than that.
Yeah.
So that's a somewhat short story of how we got here.
Nice. And let me ask about the micro. Was the Bitbox Micro?
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to know about that.
Is it just the only difference is the size and there's fewer jacks, or is there something in the firmware that's different as well, or improved?
It's really based on the same firmware, so it's you'll see lots of things in common. I mean, we had to make several adjustments to deal with the smaller screen. So certain UX elements require there's 2 knobs instead of 4. Certain things are smaller and require a few more steps, but ultimately the capability is the same. The processor is the same. The 24-bit capability, record and playback. The engine, the underpinnings are the same, but then it does get down to the I/O. You've got 4 audio quality inputs and 4 CV quality inputs and 8 audio quality outputs, which is a different configuration on the Bitbox. You have way more CV inputs, a few less CV, a few less audio outputs. But I think the best summary I can give is that Micro is an 8-channel sampler and Bitbox is a 16-channel sampler.
Okay. Dope. Oh, excuse me. So yeah, that's really dope. I got Travarsky here that says how much she likes the Blue Box. And actually, let's
Thank you, Travarsky.
let's see Travarsi in action, demo in the blue box. I'm going to put it up here, then we'll check it out right quick. There we go. All right.
Check again. 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 Check again.
Yeah.
Looks like she was rocking it more as a mixer in that capacity, right?
Yeah, she really was. I mean, she was doing some great things with just muting and unmuting, and that's a very powerful feature that goes unnoticed often. She was also manipulating a lot of the live effects. There's a pretty extensive reverb built into it, and a delay, an enhanced delay from what our black box has. So she was making a mix on the fly based on just mutes and effects manipulations, including some XY controls on the effects page.
Does the blue box time stretch and transpose, or is it
No,
not
it
that in
doesn't.
depth?
No, it's
That's
meant
fine.
for for the black box will do that, but the blue box is just meant for tracking, just recording
Right.
and playback at the same speed.
That's good. So is there an actual tempo per recording too, or is that like it's just kind of like running like a 6-track just straight, no time based recording?
Well, there is an internal clock that's
Okay.
very similar to black box. You've got a metronome, you've got bars and beats, you've got an internal tempo that you can set. Take a quick look and remind myself. Yeah, and turn the metronome on and off. It's got sync via Midi, so I've seen people take the Midi outputs, which are on the lower front. Ken's giving you a view of that. Then use the MIDI adapters, and you can drive something else like the Hydrosynth you've got there, or MPC or something, and then get external recordings going. You can record in multiple passes. You don't need to record everything at once. You combine playback with recording. It's really, people have asked for it to become more of a porto studio. It's not currently a full-fledged one. I mean, for example, you're having to start from the beginning and work from there. There's not a like punch in, punch out system yet, but we'll see where that heads.
Yeah, I mean, you already got a lot in a small box, so
Yeah, no doubt.
you know.
What I was thinking, I was like,
I got a
that's
question for you on that same level. I know that so we just talked about how you have all these different Eurorack modules, and you've got the black box, and now you've got the blue box as well. How do you manage feature requests and updates, as far as like do you go in a cyclic form where you're like, okay, we're going to do this one, then we're moving to this one, then we're doing this one? Or do you kind of work on all the ones that share some platform and then kind of try to do them in bulk? Or how does that work for you guys?
Yeah, first, it's not easy. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
It is largely what you described. I mean, I find that both as the one of the only programmers, we do have some external resource doing that with us now. You need to. There's only so many projects you can do at once. I generally find with the software we're generally constrained by let's focus on one product at a time. Thankfully, the code base is now structured such that Blackbox, all the samplers in Blackbox share that in common, so we can do, implement some new features there like we did in the springtime, and we will soon do again, and roll that out all at once. But still, to test and validate that stuff requires, Steve or other folks going through that. So it's, we're having to, for the most part, like chunk through the different products, like a week or two on this, a week or two on that, and then when we do big releases like the Blue Box, it can take 3, 4, 5 months of dedicated time to just that. I mean, it's it's nice to see it finally, nearly finally shipping, but it's so many small things that come together of getting it through FCC approval or stuff that's kind of not sexy but still needs to be done and is important. It takes a lot of time. So yeah, we as far as the feature requests, I mean, we really start with the forums. That's a great place to find what everybody is saying. Admittedly, like that too, like the list never gets shorter, so we're having to a few times a year go through that and organize, you know, organize those requests into buckets, try and prioritize against that. I mean, largely like new features are in batches, like you may very well see some improvements on the sequencer side of things in the next little bit. That because it's it's important to, it saves a lot of time and effort to focus in one area, and then bang out 8 or 10 things at once, as opposed to taking whatever's popular followed by what's next most popular, because that can be all over the place.
Excellent.
But yeah, I do want to reinforce like the forum's important, and talking to people. I miss the fact we don't have any trade shows. It's always great to talk to people like Fess in person and really get a sense of like what's important, because there's we're never satisfied with what's how the state of affairs. It's never completely done. And that said, like features can only be added, not taken away. It's a very difficult thing to have to go back and say, I'm sorry that whatever from version 1.0 is no longer practical. We're going to have to discontinue that. So we want to judiciously choose what features to add and not get too carried away. But it's hard.
Yeah, trade shows. You guys remember those?
Do you find that when you're looking at the forums, and you're trying to prioritize your updates, or be it features, bugs, whatever it is, do you find that sometimes your personal priorities of what you would like to do are at odds with what you see in the forums?
I mean, sure, it's everybody sees it differently. I mean, within the forum, like each person has their own priorities. I'm there's certain things. For the most part, I would say the large majority of stuff we hear is like, that's great. We'll add it to our list and prioritize it accordingly. It's only the things that I would never sort of disregard out of hand are let's take the product in a totally different direction. Like let's take the black box and turn it into a accounting software or something. I mean, there's like it's a kind of ridiculous example, but let's make it much, much bigger than it is, where hey, there's another piece of gear over here that does that incredibly well. I mean, that's where you got to pick your battles. Sometimes it makes more sense to generate another product, to start a new product instead. Actually, one thing I will say, an important thing about user feedback that I have found over the years is that customers and user feedback are absolutely fantastic for taking you from 1.1 to 1.2 to 1.3 and so on and so on and so on. Like it's starting a new product, like that's a like very different thing. And that's where if you in some of my earlier business, like if you listen to customer feedback too much, if you just evolve the product incrementally, like you don't make any big breakthroughs. And that's it's of course customers aren't happy when you ignore them for some amount of time, but sometimes that's important and necessary, and ultimately pays dividends in the long run. Like the move to Blue Box or even Black Box. There was for the longest time people were all focused on Eurorack samplers, and now that we've got a tabletop one, they're really focused on that, and hopefully that gives you some insights into some of the challenges that we face in terms of prioritizing, and when to focus on hardware, and how there's never enough time for features and way too many requests to be ever properly handled.
Well, I definitely applaud you and 1010, starting with you, for seeing the market and attacking it early. Seeing the market of hardware users who basically want their hardware to do almost any and everything that like an Ableton or a Logic can do. And I know that that's a hard battle, but when I think of like the hardware sampler environment now, and reading these forums and reading the complaints and and reading the wishes from lots of users of various different hardware samplers, it always more than not comes back to, well, can it do this? Can it do that? And it's always based off of like Ableton features like time stretching or like clip launching or you know. So yeah, like I really applaud you for hitting that right out the bat, because when people ask me about the black box, I basically in a shorthand tell them that it's like a SB404 with time stretching, and people's eyes widen with just that one sentence alone. So I definitely treat it that way as well, because like I don't really touch my 404 at all during performances and whatnot, because I don't really need to anymore. That was one of the drawbacks that I've always didn't really like about it. I like to do like remixing live and not have to just adhere to whatever tempo I'm playing for, whatever time that sample is loaded. So I like the ability to be able to like I said, remix and just uh reflip things, and also be able to do that in a small like frame of space on my desk, or whether it's on a performance table or whatnot. It's great.
I
I
agree with
think that's one of the interesting ways of looking at it is when you look at the black box and how it handles samples and things. It's a little bit different than some of the other gear that I've used before. And if you're doing arranging, the fact that you can basically have like kind of, I think it's like 16 squares that are all your different sequences that you can quickly jump between, and it's like you can basically completely rearrange your beats, just by tapping out different sequences on the screen here. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. And because you have those 16 cells per project, I don't even use the song mode on Black Box, because I don't really need to, essentially. But I see that's where you can get into Blue Box, and if you have both of them, Blue Box can kind of be your actual like arrangement view, if you will, and Black Box is like your clip view.
it.
So that's
Have
the way
yeah.
yeah, that's the way I see it, at least. And I know a lot of other producers out there and performing artists and whatnot will probably look at it the same way.
Well, I'll tell you something like we were talking about earlier. Is one of the advantages too of the black box is that, like you were saying, it's like SB404 with time stretching, and
Yeah.
just the simplicity of being able to load entire song
Yeah.
file into a clip and be able to launch that. Like I have a couple of presets on there where it's like one preset is a whole album, another one
Mm-hmm.
another whole album. So if I needed to do something in a compact way, I could take some sort of performance effects and take that and actually do a set. Now it wouldn't be my normal thing where, like you said, you like to live mix, live arrange, and that kind of stuff. But from one perspective, that's a whole use case that you could just load your tracks onto to this small box and get out there and perform full sets.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even necessarily the way you would use it in the studio, but it's a dope way to use it. Hey, I wanted to ask you. We have somebody. I put the question up on the screen here. Actually, Aaron, if you could turn your mic up just a little bit, if you could adjust your volume.
See, I'm not sure I know how to do that. I was trying to find my way through the interface.
And it works. It's if you can, that's cool. But I don't want to cause you any any trouble over there.
Anybody know anything about audio?
But someone was asking, what are the sampling specs of the Blue Box?
Sure. So both boxes, in fact, all our boxes are 48 kilohertz, 24-bit stereo sampling. I guess, yeah, in the case of the Blue Box, it's 12 different channels. But we found that that's more than good enough. I know that some audio interfaces go up to 96, but I quite honestly don't see the point of that.
Mm-hmm.
I did see. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And I want to get to a couple of these questions here. Then, actually, before we get to a couple of questions, Ken, I noticed you put a splitter up there. What's up? Did you? Oh,
Probably.
Is that his?
Maybe I can take that if you want.
But, okay.
So that's
ahead.
That's from the Sweetwater catalog. That's a 3.5 millimeter stereo to two mono inputs. That's exactly what you need for Eurorack connections because it takes it into two, Eurorack slots.
Sorry about that. I had to run and check on the kids real quick, so I might have missed what you were saying there.
Is their
But
hair on fire?
yeah.
Everybody's setting their hair on fire
Well,
today. That's the thing.
Ollie and Kenny are upstairs, and those are the two. Those are the two that I actually have to worry about. So, because Ollie is almost 6 and Kenny's 20 and autistic, and they like to get into it. So I'm always checking on them. But yeah, these cables here, I actually had picked these up for a totally different use case for some Eurorack stuff that I was doing, and it's handy to be able to split things. But yeah, man, it's crazy how many inputs you can get on this thing by doing that. Like having 12 inputs is just like in such a small device like that is awesome. And I've also got cables that are 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch. So you just plug them in and go straight to your any line level gear and you're good to go.
It records
if you
Eurorack
don't
level
have-
too, right?
Right, so it's all running at Eurorack level, and if you don't have those cables, you're constrained to 6 inputs. But if you want to break it out and get all the way to 12, you can.
Yeah, and one of the advantages to the fact that it'll accept the Eurorack level is that you're less likely to be blowing things out and whatnot if you're kind of getting a little hot and heavy with your gear, So
Yeah.
it's nice to have that headroom,
For sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Can we dive into a little bit of the dirty with it? Tell us a little bit about the audio engine that you're dealing with here, and let's talk about because it is a mixer. Let's talk about headroom and compression and how you're handling these sorts of challenges as far as mixing in 12 inputs and keeping a nice signal with low noise and all that
Sure.
good stuff.
Let's see. I mean, to start with, like it helps having really clean audio input. We had we entirely redesigned the audio section of the board, to get it as clean as possible. So starting with that, like get good clean signal. Internally, everything's being processed at 32 bits. I mean, it's a 24-bit floating point number, so you really have lots and lots of headroom. It's more a matter of like really the biggest constraint is summing together that amount of like analog ins. At some point that's going to add together. I mean, I'm surprised that we haven't had to do this yet, but I mean, like noise gates and various other tricks are there if you need to try and add more headroom. The outputs, I mean, running at Eurorack levels, like making that stuff like really hot, like sort of makes it so that the noise floor, just like the everyday noise floor or stuff coming in the door, like is pretty far out of reach. That really helps. I mean, internally, there's really only one dual core processor doing all the work. That's not being passed back and forth. It's being converted to digital. Everything's happening from there on off, and then it's being output again once. So that's in many ways can be cleaner than an analog mixer because it's only going through a conversion, and then it's being dealt with in very deep 32-bit numbers and then being shipped out one time. Whereas an analog mixer, like every time you hand it off, there's the opportunity to lose signal quality or signal fidelity. Am I missing anything there?
Yeah, I would like to know a little bit more about. So the way that compression is handled is kind of separate from the effects section. You have compression. You have a compression on the end, and you can basically say compression on or off in that area. What brought about that idea as opposed to having it just be a send kind of thing?
It's like the black box.
So on Blue Box we have actually a different compressor. It's if you have it there sitting there in front of you, press the main page and then the B button, and then if you now scroll down, you'll see a whole bunch of parameters that a whole bunch of compression parameters that are now exposed to you that aren't available in the black box.
No,
That is
not at all.
on the master output. Yeah, and it's quite sophisticated in that you can do like RMS or peak threshold and that kind of thing. You can do look ahead and various other tricks to make it sound as transparent as possible. I guess this is a trick I picked up, from my Native Instruments days. That, like, you really, if you want to have something good and punchy sounding, and it's going to have a whole bunch of separate inputs, stick a compressor at the end, and that really, avoids, clipping. If depending on how you set it, you can get it so that something will never clip. Granted, that can be too aggressive, which some people argue our black box compressor is too aggressive. But here you have control over that, and it is on the master output. With regards to whether or not you do it externally, that's up to you. I mean, with two stereo effect sends and two internal effects, you can mix and match how you like. I mean, with the there's each channel could go to an internal delay or reverb. The reverb, we've also stepped that up quite extensively. That's a much bigger, full-fledged reverb than we have on our black box, and that's part of what you heard in the Travarsi video.
Now I haven't had a chance to dig that deep into it just yet. I'm kind of just scratching the surface of it. Like I opened it up the other day, and this weekend has been like my first like little foray of like, oh, let's explore the UI on this thing. And it's a little bit familiar to the black box, but at the same time it's also a totally different thing,
Right.
So there are some things in there that I'm like anxious to get into. I will ask, because you have so many different inputs, are you able to do any side chaining, like for the to make it duck?
Yeah, currently there's no ducking. That's certainly something that came up along the way. I mean, it would be, we've got the power with the touchscreen and various things to make that a little easier to do than normal, but presently, no.
Okay. Yeah,
I can almost guarantee you that's going to be a top user request.
All right. I mean, something I haven't mentioned is that it does have MIDI control. So it's got a pretty extensive hookup of separate MIDI controller. You could even do like, side chaining or if you use something like LFO tool where it's not technically side chaining, but it's, similar rhythmic.
MIDI ducking, we'll call
Yep.
it.
MIDI ducking.
Yep.
Yeah, you can do that kind of thing if you wanted to. And yeah, because it's got a sequencer inside, you could be chaining or syncing to something else that's driving that.
So that's actually one of the things that I haven't had a chance to look into at all yet. But can you talk to us a little bit about the MIDI mapping and how that works on this?
This thing just keeps sounding better and better. I'm like,
Yeah.
I need one now. I didn't.
No, the MIDI mapping, we were inspired by the more direct, Ableton style mapping where you hit a learn button, touch the control, and wiggle the knob, and boom, there it is. Most of the controls can be mapped. I can walk. It looks like you don't have a MIDI controller hooked up, but it's, because it's got a device port, you could hook a small USB controller up if you wanted. Like, I've got a Presonus Atom here in front of me. Another popular one is the Novation Launch Control, something with 8 knobs and faders and buttons, and everything from like mutes and solos to gains and effect sends and what else.
Wow.
The various effects parameters like can all be MIDI controlled in a little deeper, more complete way than on the black box.
That sounds amazing.
Indeed.
Yeah, this is all the kind of useful things that I envision. So I was actually talking to somebody. I think I had posted a picture on Facebook or something, and somebody had commented to me, "Oh, nobody ever makes a mixer that has the control surface that I want." And then I was kind of like, "Well, what exactly do you want?" Because that's a really, really broad term. Because in the same post, the person had mentioned DJ mixers, and I'm thinking in my mind like rack mixers, and there was a separation of mindset on how workflows are and how I envision using this thing in my setup. And my first thought was Korg makes these great little Bluetooth MIDI controllers, and one of them is a straight up mixer. It's got a mixer and it's labeled like a mixer, and it's got faders and it's got mute and solo buttons and all that good stuff. And my first thought is like, dude, I can throw this thing into a suitcase, like literally get like one of those Halliburton style suitcases, some Velcro, and I'm a Velcro each piece like into a little suitcase, have like that Korg controller, and I have like complete mix control with performance controls of the mixer and everything right then and there. And the person was like, "Yeah, but I want like crossfade." And I'm like, "You can get that too." Like, like this is kind of all available, really.
At some point, go ahead. I was gonna say at some point you have to start to like learn how to work within, the limitations of certain stuff too.
Sure,
Everybody's going to
sure.
always want something that they don't have, especially in terms of hardware and gear. It's like everybody wants that all-in-one magic box. Yet,
Right.
But
sometimes
when you can
That's
MIDI
what we
map
should do.
out when you can MIDI map out a mixer with all these different controls, though, it is interesting how you can make it your own and kind of
Mhm.
work things to your advantage that way.
And then that device hosts, the USB device host on both boxes is, you can't really get more clutch than that. It's like, to me, that is a small mini computer that now is hosting a MIDI controller and everything is programmable. Come on, guys. This is amazing.
I'm glad you think so. I mean, we're inspired by the suitcase, crowd that's building custom synths in a box. I
Yeah.
mean, this is meant for that. And yeah, if you want to sort of hide it and put a MIDI controller as its face, like that's great, and that's something we plan for. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Korg Nano controllers. Like they're
Yeah, I think that's what I was referring to. Let me actually pull the controller up that I'm talking about, because like I just think to me it's like a perfect pairing. So I'm pretty much planning on grabbing that. Like right now I have a Arturia Mini Lab controller that I'm going to use with it, but I think I'm going to grab this Korg thing to make it happen, because to me it just sounds like match made in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of great suitcase boxes, and I've also been over the months looking at like what are you guys using for a mixer, and it seems like oftentimes they have some weird offboard thing, or maybe just a passive line mixer or something. And
Mhm.
hopefully this will address that. Granted, it doesn't have a crossfader. That's one thing you mentioned that we can't currently do, but you could certainly set up a control that's one two separate knobs you have to work at the same time.
I've been using the MIDI Fighter Twister for the black box. That works well, and actually, it's been working a lot better with some of your newer updates. Like I can actually, it's got push knobs on it as well that I can use to like trigger the clips and whatnot.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, so I'm sure that could have the same use with the blue box as well, especially with having like 16 knobs
Yeah, with a setup like that, it feels like your only limitation to some degree is your imagination and know-how
and understanding. Yep,
of understanding
patching.
how
Yep.
to set it up. You know what I mean? Because something like that, you have the black box or the blue box that's the brains that have
Hmm.
capability. If you have a controller like that you can throw on, and if you know how to program it and set it up properly, you got knobs that twist and push. You know what I mean? That's a lot of control you can set up. Let me add this to the screen.
So yeah, this right here, and I actually have another idea that I haven't tried yet, but due to the fact that I'm doing beta testing anyway, I might as well try it out. I'm gonna hook it to the S2400, and the S2400 is gonna be able to do MIDI stuff with that as well. So, and it's practically laid out like a mixer as well, so I'll probably mess with that as well. But yeah, like just the fact that how small this is, you can do some real damage as far as like a performance setup between having, if you've got um, blue box, black box, any sampler, any synth, there's so many small products out now, like be it a Volca, be it teenage engineering stuff, what is it, the live and 8-bit warps. I know Corey just recently got one of those things. There's all these like really interesting super small pieces of gear that maybe 15 years ago we wouldn't have really had quite as much of a range like that, but now like that really small market has exploded.
It
And
really
it's just like, dude, you can fit in a suitcase now what most people couldn't have fit into a room 20 years ago.
That's true, Ken. That's something I look at our rooms, and I know we have a lot of big gear. But the reality is the way the tabletop market has expanded and exploded, tabletop and Eurorack, you could really have our studios or some sort of iteration thereof in a suitcase in a box or something portable that you can go around with. Just tabletop sense, some iPad stuff, or the Bitbox or Black Box and Eurorack, and those combinations of just small, dope things that you could take out and perform and do like a full-fledged like stuff that. So here's the thing is kind of like, we could be in our studios, we can create things that are so lavish and expansive with all of this stuff, and it's always been a conundrum of like, but how do I go and take this out and perform it live? You know what I mean? Without it just being a recording of it.
Yep.
But now you have a lot of flexibility in those.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been watching recently. So I've been in the DJ market for a long time, and it's that space seems to be working very differently. It seems like DJs kind of need to show up and impress that they're doing something, and like that all the Pioneer gear and the stuff that sort of aspires to be the Pioneer gear is like big and chunky and heavy and thick and trying to make a statement. Whereas it seems like this stuff is kind of the opposite of that. And it's great to be playing in that space where it's more about like how much stuff can I fit on my desk and what's going to be easier for me to take with me. And
well, one of the other sides of that is so if you happen to be one of those idiots that has too much gear in their studio than they should have, when you set up for live shows and when you want to do a live show, you have to really think about, okay, how am I going to pare things down? How am I going to make this work? How am I going to make things fit? And when you do that, you end up creating your performance rig, right? And your performance rig usually means you have to buy at least a few pieces of gear to make it happen, right? Like you're going to buy a case that's going to be a certain size. You're going to have this, you're going to have that. That stuff takes up more room in your studio. So now you have even less space. So it's not only is there a benefit of like performing out with something that like, hey, I can carry it in a suitcase, but also now you can prepare in a way that's not going to completely destroy the rest of your studio. Like your actual studio life doesn't have to come to a complete halt because, oh, well, now I got to break out this other mixer and I got to do this and I got to do that. No, not really. Like now you've got like this little mixer. You just plug these cables in, you're good to go,
Yep.
Yeah. And as one of those DJs who, likes to be doing stuff on stage, I can say that blue box specifically can be like a one box solution for the person who doesn't want to break down their whole studio to go out and perform. And I think that was actually the appeal to Black Box to me. Most people ask me all the time, why don't I just use my laptop in Ableton to perform? And it's like, well, I use my laptop to DJ. I didn't want to have to like rely on that to also perform as well. So that's why I got into hardware. And when the Black Box came out, I could actually sort of pre-build sets and ideas on Ableton and kind of like sample that on Black Box and rework it. Now I don't even really have to think about Ableton anymore with this blue box. I can kind of just have all my recordings, if you will, on there. And then after that, drag them into a DAW like Ableton or something for more arrangement. And like, I really enjoy being able to just almost crank out full songs without having to turn the computer on. So, and there's a lot of people like me that think that way as well. So again, I just really applaud you for recognizing that market is out there and it's like, it's here to stay.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, thanks for supporting us. And we're just riding trends at the same time. Like the fact that you can get a $500 box that is essentially a computer that, was as powerful as your phone, 10 years ago. I mean, that's, that a company our size can produce something like this for this price is, remarkable and like enables things that wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. And it's great. And the fact that the micro SD cards are so ridiculously big, like just recently the factory came to me and said, oh, our supplier is discontinuing the 16 gig cards. Can we give you a 13 gig card at the same, I'm sorry, a 32 gig card at the same price? Like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
It's, right. And that's space that, I'm sure you remember like putting samples on floppy disks.
Yeah.
And, so compared to that, it's just light years ahead. I mean, this is, more powerful.
The load time too. Load time too is like, you can't really complain much about that. I know a few newer groove boxes that have a lot slower long time with a lot less stuff to load than, the Black Box. So,
hey, I got a question for you about, so like while we're talking kind of performance oriented stuff, can we talk a little bit about how recording is done? Like, so say you're in a live scenario like this, and you want to track your set. Is there, so basically when you're recording, is it stemming everything? Is it all individual tracks, or are we recording mix downs? Like, how is that working?
Yeah, I mean, I can show you real quick. When you just go to the mixer page and then press the record button, press record on the screen, lower right on the screen. Oh, you're okay. Now, basically, tap any of the tracks that you want to record, and they'll turn red. Also, looks like you're running an older version, but
Yeah, I haven't even updated yet. Like,
yeah. All right,
I'm
so
just getting.
click 5 and 6 in the M track. So now those are record enabled, and you hit record and play, and you've got those things for later use. And you can the master works the same way. So in short, you're grabbing stems, and the master if you want it.
Excellent.
Is that percentage number like the CPU?
Yes, that is the CPU percentage number, but it doesn't appear on the 1.0 version.
Okay.
In fact, 15%. Yeah, that's pretty low.
Nice.
Lower than I would expect.
That is pretty low. Yeah. Thanks.
So yeah, and you can make it jump though. You can make it jump if you just keep hitting stop.
Yeah, we'll upgrade the build, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll be updating that today too. But like I said, to me, it's part of that whole like performance thing. It's like you get that great set, and it's like, oh man, I wish I had that recorded. Or you do that great set, and you get a front of house mix, and the front of house mix sounds like somebody was in the bathroom the whole time. Like,
Yeah.
was nobody manning this board?
Another thing about that too is that a lot of times we find ourselves rehearsing, playing, or jamming at home, preparing for sets. And there's times when I'm like, yo, that was a great take. Like, I should have recorded that. You know what I mean? That was a great set. And that could be like a release of some sort or whatever you want to do. So it's cool to have something convenient like this that you could just run for your rehearsals and your jam sessions in your studio. And you never know what you might be able to take from that. There's countless amounts of times that I've set that just kind of patched recreationally, no real intention, and end up digging what I'm doing, and then it's time to go do something else and I have to come back. It's just nice to be able to capture that stuff, have something where you can easily capture that stuff like that.
Yeah, and because the micro SD cards are so plentiful and cheap, and you can record that for 4 straight hours, and it won't be a problem. Granted, it'll start to take up like 4 gigs per track, but that's doable.
I
You
want
can
to
throw that away later if you want.
I want to ask a question that this is kind of going back to earlier in the show where you were going through the lineage of your product line, and Synthbox was mentioned.
Yes.
No, that is not the one that I wanted to put up there, but let me find it. Synthbox was mentioned, and there was a thought that here it is. So there's now Synthbox firmware you can download for your Bitbox MK2 to take advantage of a better processor, but you aren't selling the Synthbox separately anymore. So
That's right.
This question came about because somebody said, the Synthbox is basically slept on, and it should get more attention. So what's the story there?
Yeah. I wish I had a good answer for you. I mean, we spent a lot of time on that product. I really like it. When we sell them as separate products, it becomes a confusing message, honestly, when you have like, hey, this hardware can be 2 other things, but then it becomes hard to track. Like, well, what are you buying it for, and how popular is it, and should we invest more time and effort into it? I mean, in fairness, we built a polyphonic synth, for Eurorack, and I think polyphonic in Eurorack was a bit of a miss. I mean, people generally prefer kind of monophonic stuff and being able to sculpt 4 separate voices, and we could certainly, a very popular request, which we may still do, is to have each voice be addressable separately and have each voice be a separate timbre, so be multi-timbral. We didn't do that. I mean, it's we're faced with limited resources and overwhelming requests, and the sampling did much better and took off, and that's why we spent a lot more time on that. Is it a sleeper? Will we do more with it? We might. I mean, there's still opportunity there. I'm glad we worked on it. I mean, I wish everyone can understand that what we're doing here is may seem less deliberate than it actually is, or more deliberate than it actually is. I mean, we're experimenting. We throw stuff out there like Synthbox and see what kind of uptake is there, how is it met in the marketplace. Lots of people use it, and Synthbox was not our most popular product, and we're happy to continue to support it. But we made the move in hardware to not have a separate piece of hardware this time around, and we'll see where that takes us. I mean, I think it's eye-opening to see how even something like the Korg samplers, where they have like it's a synth and a sampler that look almost identical, and yet they're different colors and they call them different things. And that seems to be the winning strategy, is to not have cross-gradable firmware, because I know customers love it, and I know it makes for a very versatile box, but it makes for like a very confusing product line. And what aisle do you put it in, and what category do you look for it in, and how do people regard it? It becomes very blurred when we do that.
It's funny you mentioned that, when I see people like cracking this Korg box so that they can put the other firmware on them. And yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't be against that as a manufacturer, but it's like, how much effort do you put into supporting that and promoting that, and
sure.
trying to explain that one thing does two things?
Well, what about your personal inspiration? So like obviously work is a whole lot easier when you're feeling inspired that particular day. I don't know how your mind works, but mine can sometimes be a bit scattered to where I'm like, man, I'm really interested in doing this task today, and that task today might be a task that was probably boring or tedious some other day, and then bouncing back and forth between different products or whatever it is. So do you find yourself ever like, man, I really want to work on this product, but I'm supposed to be doing this, that kind of
I
thing?
mean, of course, but I mean, it's to try and give you a better sense of how that goes. I mean, granted, just even being here, like starting a company and making instruments, like that's a huge, huge win. I mean, compared to somebody who works for an accounting firm, doing something that they hate. I mean, it's there's nothing wrong with accounting, but if you hate it, don't do it. But we're creative people, and we like to do, we get caught up in the next shiny thing. Granted, there's plenty of times when it's in the schedule to ship the product. I mean, probably the least fun part of shipping a product and working in this industry is sort of like the last few months, when you're having to, it's time to get it out the door, it's time to ship. So my previous work experience was really helpful, and like you've got to trim down the bug list, you've got to very aggressively like stop taking on new features, and that's I guess you more asked what's my inspiration, but that's the point when your baby keeps you up all night, won't stop crying, and everybody tells you it's ugly. That's kind of the part of the process of getting the thing out the door, but it's necessary and it has to be done. What inspires me, I like making I like making new and different stuff, and sometimes it's let's build something like let's play with arpeggiation, let's play with lasers, let's play with some some open source thing and try and get it to run in the box. It's like I'm doing this because I love experimenting, I love building stuff, and it's fun to find the next new thing. And it's easy to get overwhelmed with requests, and try and solve too many of the world's problems, when what you really want to do is solve something simple and selfish. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm just looking at it like, you've got this, you've got the Synthbox, like what we were talking about. And as more products, come about, as the brand 1010 music grows and people become more aware of it, you've got multiple products out there. You've got desktop, which desktop is obviously a far larger market than Eurorack. I've been preaching that for years, that a lot of people just like, I feel like people know it, but they don't want to admit to it. Like it's like there's a whole huge market for desktop, and but now that because of that outreach, the brand is now more exposed, people are more aware of it, and it kind of reinvigorates some of the interest in that first product that maybe was your baby, and you're like, oh, I feel like that baby was a little slept on, and now you're like, maybe it's time to revisit some of those ideas, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the biggest challenge I have is like how to manage my time. It's like
Yep.
There's so many opportunities, there's so many cool things. Like you've got to hunker down and get stuff out the door. You've got to make stuff work properly. There's plenty of things where it's like, hey, such and such is broken and needs to be fixed. But choosing what product to do next is far and away the toughest challenge that we have. And it's even I'm inspired by the statement of the problem once solved seems obvious. I mean, something like the black box seems, like a good idea now, but 2-3 years ago, like, I don't know. And to your point about tabletop, like, yes, it's a bigger market, but it's for, those of us playing in the Eurorack space, it's a pretty big step up. Like, you better be able to build an enclosure and tackle power supplies and get FCC approval and work more directly with retailers, because it's kind of a different channel for tabletop units. So I certainly understand why people don't do it. And why big companies choose much more carefully. Choose not to do certain things and leave opportunities like the blue box open to us, because it's a big opportunity for us, but perhaps a small opportunity for a bigger company who has bigger fish to fry and can build on top of their synthesizer line or their interface line or something like that.
Absolutely.
I got one question here though that let's see here. I was asked to ask Aaron what he did for fun over Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, is that someone I know asking this question? All right, well, I'll reveal it anyway. I was inspired over Thanksgiving weekend to try and get Doom running on the black box.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
So
Was that in response to seeing somebody getting Doom running on the Pioneer XDJ?
it's I maybe not that specifically, but I've seen that plenty of places.
This feels very Paul Schreiber.
Yeah,
Yeah.
did he do that too?
I could see him
Paul.
doing it.
But it was, you get what was the inspiration there? Is to do something wacky and different and something that has no stakes attached to it. Like, nobody's going to expect like, hey, where's my CV control over the gun refresh rate or something like.
Right.
It just, and starting with a clean slate and starting with something you're not going to try and ship. You can just be a lot more sloppy, and it's the fun parts, not the, unpleasant parts of it. Or the work of shipping a product out the door. And it was inspiring to see like what, since Doom's open source, it was inspiring to see what other people had done out there. And, there's all kinds of just cool things to play with.
Doombox. Coming to
the Doombox. I like that.
Doombox. Nice.
My son would lose his mind. He's literally upstairs playing Doom right now. So
Oh, really?
yeah,
Which version of
he's
Doom?
he's a Doom addict. So
Well, let me ask
yeah,
you, this has been like a really cool, like there's been a lot of good information that you've shared here. And what I'm interested is where do you see yourself going from here? I don't know, from a product design perspective, you can't necessarily share what you're planning on doing, but kind of overall for 1010 Music, where do you see yourself kind of going in the future?
Great question, and especially having just shipped something, we're really starting to ask those questions of ourselves, and there's not any easy answers.
Yeah.
I will say that tabletop and like trying to, we want to build stuff that's fun, that's inspirational, that plays nice with others. We want to take advantage of the trends of stuff that's getting more powerful and less expensive and smaller. I mean, all these things. It seems like there's an opportunity to go even smaller still. There's plenty of things that haven't been done well in sort of this form factor yet that we'd like to play with. But electronic music is a cool evolving space, and there's always some new way to mangle your sound, and it's got to be fun and innovative. But it's at the expense of, I've seen plenty of big companies any company really, no matter of the size, as you build your product portfolio, stuff gets deeper and more complicated, and try and like avoid that and try and like start new points of inspiration, like the black box, like the blue box, where they do something, they're in a new category and can start fresh and be a 1.0 and not necessarily be a it's blah de blah version 12.6. Like, it's hard to get excited about that. That said, like these ideas, if you've got ideas, hit me up. I'd love to hear them. It's something like the blue box we don't have a huge stack of those things lined up. There's so many different opportunities and various trade-offs, and what do we know how to do, and recording hard disk stuff or recording stuff to a streaming micro SD card is something we now have some expertise in and can build upon that. Hopefully that answers the question. It's just like continue to try and do new, interesting, fun stuff. And, sometimes defining what that is not simple. Like, you have to explore it. It has to reveal itself to you. It's not simply, here's the master plan and I've got it all mapped out.
Well, you know what I
I
would
think
say is, yeah, go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I think to kind of help us all extrapolate a little bit from how your mind is working. Can you tell us a little bit about the music that you like to make and the type of gear that you like to use outside of 1010 stuff? Like,
Well, revealing my personal preferences here, I'm a huge Anjuna Deep fan. That's sort of like deep house, kind of trancy stuff. Like I love that stuff, especially because I love listening to it while I work. So that's and I've got some background in DJ stuff, and so I love that type of music. Granted, I also love some classical music and some other wacky things, but like um, that stuff, like what the Above and Beyond guys do. Trying to think. There's, I'm always inspired by. I remember when Skrillex jumped on the scene, like some of that's just like, wow, that's so, unbelievably amazing. Granted, that's like more of a data reference now, but what do I like? I mean, it's, I like stuff that kind of like ambient and kind of slower stuff, is really appealing to me now. So, things that will help you build grooves and help you sort of work in bigger chunks. I mean, like I'm less personally interested in sort of like the perfect note than I am something that sort of like builds a riff or creates a vibe or, helps you combine bigger pieces together. Like I was very much inspired early on by the Sonic Foundry Acid that you can, take bigger chunks of things and put stuff together. So that would probably be something where I would spend more time on than, making the ultimate synthesizer.
cool. And what gear are you using currently to do your music?
So, I've got a strange hodgepodge of gear here. I just bought a Korg Wave State, which I actually really like. I've been using the Novation Circuit quite a bit. Like, I like how that sort of the simplicity of that sequencer and just makes it easy, just like throw together like wacky little grooves. I use Live. I actually do love a lot of the sort of arpeggiations and the sort of like building block things where you can like drop in, an arpeggiator, a scale manipulator, and throw it into endless delay. I mean, some of that stuff gets pretty cool pretty quickly, and like I'm inspired by a lot of that. I'm trying to think of another reference I've got for you. I guess, yeah, keep going.
Yeah, no, I just kind of wanted to basically draw on, okay, well, this is the style of music you make. These are the type of tools you like to use. A lot of times that stuff will kind of inform where your ideas will come from. And, as far as like creating new products and whatnot, I think I can speak for myself and probably Corey as well, that, the gear that we use and the type of music that we make informs us as far as like, man, I wish I had something that could do X,
Right. And is there something you'd suggest I go look at? I mean, it's like, what am I missing?
Performer is a pretty cool thing.
That's the only thing that
Yeah, Performer is really cool. Hydrosynth is amazing. I actually say that like completely honestly and earnestly, because I will say that one thing that has been inspiring me personally a lot lately is the polyphonic aftertouch stuff. I'm finding that because I'm not a great player. However, what I'm finding is, like you were talking about the ambient stuff and just like long evolving things. I really like using long evolving LFOs and envelopes and that sort of thing. And then controlling individual modulation of those sorts of things with like individual pressure is like stunning. I absolutely love doing that kind of stuff. And the other thing that I always jump into is just like guitar pedals. Like I love a good delay, reverb, I love quirky guitar pedals. I'm actually buying a few crappy ones, like just because I'm like, man, I remember in like 96, I had this guitar pedal that was horrible. I want that again. So like I'm going back and buying like Metal Zones and like all these like goofy guitar pedals from back in the day that I'm just like, oh, I discarded this stuff at one point. And now I'm going back to it. That kind of, I love just different effects and that sort of stuff.
I see some recommendations down there in the chat. Try the Typhoon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Typhon from
Typhon.
Yeah, it's spelled with one O, and I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, Typhoon. But okay. I'll have to ask Artemy about that. So Artemy from Sign Vibes and the guys from Dreadbox, I mean, that thing does look very cool. and it's small, so you can fit that up with a blue box, no problem.
You know what I wanted to say, Aaron, is that you were saying something that made me think of this, just the idea that whether it's tough or not to figure to decide this is the product we're going to work on, or these are the features we're going to work on. I think the advantage that smaller companies have and that smaller companies act on is the fact that you build a community, and it's a community that's kind of built around the strength of the product that you're making and the integrity of you as a person of the company, and inside the company that you've made these great products. People kind of swoon around, and then the dialogue gets bigger and bigger and louder because you're willing to listen. Whether you use some, all, or none of it, you're willing to listen. And I think that's a huge advantage that 1010 Music, a company like 1010 Music, has over the big boys. Because I also think that when you're like really one of those large companies, I don't even know what the bureaucracy is inside of those large companies and who's listening to what and how it even gets to the people that matter or that could implement that stuff. So the fact that it's such a flat sort of
Right.
you know what I mean? You're there in the sauce with the folks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've worked at some of the big companies, and it's there's in almost all cases like really good people with good intentions. It's just that the big company presents it like different challenges. You got to convince 10 people to go do something instead of one. They've got product lines and marketing to contend with. Like, what's this going to mean if we do this and instead of that? And it's just so much harder to get stuff off the ground. It's I respect that, and there's certain products that couldn't be done without a big company, but the small company opportunities are really fun for me, that we can go do something and we don't have to convince a lot of people. We can just go do it. And, maybe it'll be a bomb like the laser box, but, maybe it'll be great. So you need to try that stuff and see what happens.
Yeah, I can't tell you how gratifying it is to have a product and have you, the owner and founder, actively responding on the forums and in the Facebook group. It's just, it's amazing. I've never had that relationship with the gear company without like actually knowing somebody that, like personally that works for that company. So ever since I got the black box, I kind of felt like I've like known you in a sense because I've seen you respond
Appreciate that
so much, like on the forums and whatnot.
I would say pretty much all your rack is this way. I mean, it's like, I've seen you guys at many of the same trade shows, and it's great to hang out with people like Paul Schreiber, and, the list goes on and on and on of people who are just fun to hang out with, and you can learn from, like, some of your heroes show up there, like people like Roger Lynn or Dave Rossum. I mean, like, those guys are just really fun to hang out with.
Yeah, fair enough. And black boxes actually was the catalyst of me getting into the Eurorack environment in the first place. So I kind of got into it around the same time, but when the black box came out, it's like, well, I knew I couldn't really hold myself back from it anymore, because now I have hardware that's made to complement this environment. For me, I couldn't just stop everything on what I was doing with my hardware just to focus on Eurorack. I always needed something to like implement the two.
I want to say that this is a moment that you don't often see, where the addict thanks the dealer.
That's right. Keep coming back.
Right. Keep coming
back. Tell all your friends. Thank you very much, Faz. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
Well, hey,
there's a great question in here. I want to get it before we close out, because it's a really great question. It says, J Neuro, you want to post that one up on the screen for everybody to see?
It went away before I could click on it. This one?
Yep.
So an analog box. Yeah, so to put some context on this, I've sometimes said that I envy the guys who make analog gear, because there's never like question afterwards of like, when are you going to provide free software updates? So he's suggesting that I make an analog box. I don't know. Even the name of our company is digital. It can be hard to pull that off, but I appreciate the suggestion.
Let me just say this real quick, because I've had conversations with the at the time top people over at Native, and they used to say, "Oh, our name is Native Instruments. We'll never do a standalone." And here's
of course that's wrong now,
Plus.
but yeah.
I'm just saying, don't you ever put that.
I won't, and never say never, but I mean, it's like you could still argue that they're doing embedded processing, and that's like the heart of what they're doing. It's still in that separate box, but But I mean,
I hear you.
intriguing to notice like that thing, the Machina Plus looks exactly the same as the controller. I'm surprised they made like no different choices of, you know,
I'll bite
USB
my
hose
tongue on
ports or
that.
something.
I'll bite.
You'll bite your tongue on that. Okay.
I,
Yeah.
I actually, as I heard Aaron saying that statement, I was kind of looking at the top square at Ken, like, oh,
I, yeah, yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you're not at liberty to say. I guess I don't have
No,
no horse
no,
in that race. But
Ken has many complaints about the native instruments line. And it's a dedicated show that should be.
okay, the dedicated
Yeah.
native instrument show.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, hey,
No, but
Fess and Ken, do you all have anything you want to ask or say to Aaron in closing before we get out of here?
I just want to say, every time I've met with Aaron and Christine, they just been great people, and I'm happy that we could at least see each other again this way, since we're not gonna
Yeah.
see each other at NAMM, which is sad, but it was just great having you on.
yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, it's great. It's great talking to you again. I had the opportunity of meeting you a couple years ago at NobCon, so it's cool to see your
Yes, I'm
face
sorry we
again.
didn't do that this year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
I guess before I go, let me ask: like, is there anything that you'd be pointing me at that you haven't already mentioned? Like, what should I be looking at for inspiration or otherwise?
Mm,
I don't. I feel like Ken mentioned like, well, having. I've been so wrapped up in performer. I'm just like everything meets performer. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
the Hydrosynth, I've kind of been rediscovering again, and it's kind of been killing my lust for other scents, like bigger and more expensive scents, because I'm just so blown away with Hydrosynth at the versatility. If you can put any bit of elbow grease into designing a patch or doing sound design, you could turn Hydrosynth into just about anything your palette can desire. That's a really good choice. And the fact that it's
Okay.
keyboard and desktop, the I mean, if you're space challenged, the desktop comes in clutch. you know, if you're not space challenged, the keyboard is pretty incredible with the ribbon controller and the chord mode. It's a dope sound.
I will say one thing that is really kind of nice. It's kind of a weird inspirational thing, but it's cool to have. If you're using a lot of MIDI in your setup, I got that Mio XL from iConnectivity, which is
Okay.
basically just a massive MIDI hub and integration suite kind of rack mount thing. That's been really cool to make it very easy for me to, because I like to use multiple different center pieces of gear. So like when I work, I tend to like sound design, I'll use a ton of gear, but when I'm actually making music, I like to use like maybe 3 or 4 pieces of gear tops, right? I like to keep it as straightforward as possible. And with that, I can take the USB out of that, plug it into my Force, and I'm good to go. Or I can plug it into, Black Box, or you can plug it into anything, that takes USB or even DIN. And I don't have to unplug all my MIDI stuff, which makes it just so much easier in the setup to do, cool MIDI routing and whatnot. So I've been using that a lot. And that thing, they make smaller ones too for smaller setups, but just having a really nice, MIDI routing platform is great.
Mhm.
Okay.
I got the smaller one of that, the MIDI 4, and yeah, I I second that. You could do so much complex routing with that,
It's like the
especially if
most
you,
boring inspirational thing to talk
yeah,
about,
Yeah,
but
but
it's like,
look, that's if I had told you that digital mixers were interesting 6 months ago, you might. I mean, it's a boring category, honestly, but it's it's something you need.
It's something you
yeah.
need.
Does last question? Does the Blue Box have class compliant interface capabilities?
You meaning Blue Box being an interface for a computer?
Yeah,
That's what you're saying. No, it doesn't. And in fact, that's to your earlier point, kind of like what's stuff that people ask you that you try and you know not necessarily dismiss, but try and like frame properly and say like this is what it is and this is what it's not.
right.
Blue Box is not an audio interface. We don't aspire to build something that's like meant to attach to a computer. People have asked for it. I understand it could in some situations be convenient, but it's we're focused on the out of box experience. I know, strange choice of words. We're focused on the out of the computer experience, and that means not being interfaced because it brings it's a huge undertaking to implement it, and second, it's like creates so many trade-offs of now you like how do you mix, and
Mhm.
it becomes a much more complicated product if you implement it. So that's why we're not focused on that one, and thank you for the request, but we'll see where that ends up. But no, it's currently not.
Yeah, no, it's you gotta pick and choose your battles, like you said.
Right.
So, well, listen, I want to just throw this up here. So, again, I want to thank you, Aaron, for coming by the show and having a discussion. It was a good discussion, a lot of cool stuff. And he said, I think people will probably reference this for some of the information that you mentioned too. And and also, I want to thank Christine Higgins in the chat. She's been fielding questions and knocking them out the park. So she's a wingman. And
Let me
so,
think.
yeah.
Let me take the opportunity to thank you, Ken, Corey, Fess. Appreciate the time. It was a fun opportunity. Really good to be here. Nice to actually see people and have a conversation when we can't quite do that in person right now.
Yeah,
Yes.
indeed.
Thank you for having me,
Thank you,
and
man.
thanks for all the good questions. It was very thought provoking.
Yeah. And so for those out there that want to check out the blue box or the black box or the Bitbox, go to 1010music.com. I got that shared up on the screen, and then you kind of get a little more. It's a very informative website, got all the stuff, and then check out the forums too, because there's a lot of in the community. There's a lot of information there, and a lot of people sharing and helping, and Aaron is making regular appearances in there as well. So, all right, thanks everybody. We're gonna sign off.
Thank you.
Peace.
All right.
Take care.